Today we have a free VST plugin review with the Blue Cat Audio Bundle. Hi folks, I'm Mike and I hope you're well. Who doesn't like something for free? But there's usually a catch, right? Well, not today. I'll be running through Blue Cat Audio's free bundle. It's got 7 plugins, all cross-platform, and there is no catch. You can just download them today. You don't even have to sign up. Now, before I get into that, if you like this kind of content normally, all about DAWs, home recording, plugin reviews, gear reviews, that kind of thing, then please do subscribe and ring the bell on YouTube so that you get to see my future videos. Now let's have a look at those free plugins. So the plugins in this pack come in various different formats. Of course, they come as the various different types of VST, as AAXs, as RTAs, as AUs, in 32-bit or 64-bit for Mac or for Windows. So there's a very high degree of compatibility there. So it's very likely that you're going to be able to use them with the DAW that you are using. All in all, there are 7 plugins, and they are a flanger, a chorus, a phaser, a frequency analyzer, an EQ called a triple EQ, we'll get into that later, an amp simulator, and also a gain control. And don't think the gain control is the least of them, because it's got some nice little features which we will talk about later. Now, I've got them all open on the screen at the moment because there's several things that they have in common, and I thought I'd use the opportunity to demonstrate them here. First of all, let's look at the visual side. All of these have some common controls. I'm just wiggling my mouse around the top left-hand corner of the flanger up here, and you'll see a bunch of buttons there. All of these plugins have the same group of buttons. So there's some slight variations here and there, but they're very, very similar indeed. And things like controlling the translucency or the opacity of the plugin, which I'm doing here, is always in the same place on each plugin. You can see me doing it there on the flanger, and you can see me doing it here on the frequency analyzer. The other thing you can do is change the skin on all of them. I'll go to the menu up here. I'll go to a preset skin. There's one loaded up there, and I've flicked to a different skin there, which is really nice if you want to make your plugins look a little bit different. I'll put that back to normal. Now, the other thing is a common functionality that they all have is the ability to assign MIDI knobs on your controller to knobs in the plugin. In fact, I think every single control in all the plugins can have a MIDI assignment to it. You just go up to the menu up here, then in this case I'm going to go to the preset settings, and the tab here is a control input, and I've actually already set up some controls on my MIDI keyboard for that flanger there. So as I twist the knobs around, that you can see them moving on the UI there. That's really, really useful if you want to get a very sort of organic feel by using actual physical knobs to automate things. And of course, you can just record a MIDI track there just to record an automated track for those controls. So that's very, very handy indeed. So I will be going through each of these plugins one by one, and I'll be using a sort of a demonstration piece of music. It's just a piece of music that I'm working on at the moment in order to demonstrate these plugins to you. So I'm just going to quickly play that for you so you can hear what we'll be using, and I'm going to shut down most of these in the process. So as you can hear there, sort of a main guitar starting it off with some hi-hats, etc. We've also got about 4 rhythm guitars in there, a bass, an organ, and I think that's about it. So let's get stuck in, and we'll start off by looking at the chorus. So a chorus attempts to create the illusion of several of the same instrument playing, and it does this by creating duplicates, which it then delays and also adds some pitch variation too. And in this plugin, what it does is it uses a modulator to actually modulate those things over time. That all starts to sound a little bit complicated, and probably the best way to figure out what a chorus is to actually hear it. So I've applied it to the electric guitar, which is in the intro of this song, and it solos at the beginning of the song, so I'm going to bypass the effect first of all, and I've got it set up to sort of a fairly clean chorus, as they call it. It's not a very, very strong effect, but we'll see how that sounds. I'll start the guitar without the plugin switched on. And now with it switched on, okay, so your main controls here are for the delay. That's the delay which is created. The depth, which is a kind of variation on that original delay, so the amount it varies. And then we have a rate, which is the rate of the modulation. We have a spread, which is a stereo spread to sort of really spread it across the stereo image, and then some dry wet controls to set up the mix. You also have this shape controller here, which for the LFO modulation creates two different types of sine wave there. All sounds very complicated. Let's mess around with it and make it sound sort of pretty extreme. So let's add a big delay. And let's add much more depth. And I've lowered the rate. Okay, in my opinion, that is way more than you'd probably ever use realistically, but who knows, for a particular song you may want to get that kind of effect. I think it's much better when it is used in a more subtle way, so I tend to have it much down where I had it at the beginning, perhaps with a slower rate. A nice spread is always good for the stereo image, but you need to be careful of that sometimes, so you may want to just check that in mono as well. So that's a chorus, an invaluable plugin to have. You should always have one at your disposal. Great on guitars, also great on sort of keyboard instruments. You can add them to synthesizers and things and get some really nice effects with that. But let's move on to the flanger. So a flanger is a somewhat similar effect and is easily confused, but where a chorus actually makes changes to the pitch, the flanger doesn't. Instead, it just creates copies of the original signal, adds some delay, and changes the amount of delay as you play. So the controls are fairly similar to those of the chorus with this plugin. What I'm going to do is just play the track again, just that solo guitar. I'm going to add in the flanger, and then I'm just going to mess around with some of the controls so that you can see the types of effects you'll get with this flanger. Now with the flanger on. So again, some fairly extreme versions there, but you get the general idea with the flanger. And we're going to move on to the last of these three similar sounding plugins when we look at the phaser. So often confused with both chorus and flanger is the phaser, but it's quite a different beast altogether. It doesn't introduce any delay and it doesn't do any pitch shifting. Instead, what it does is it does a phase shift around particular frequencies, and that changes with the modulation and the LFO and all that good stuff. And you get this kind of a sweeping effect with it. Now, I've actually applied it to the organ in the song, which you probably didn't know was there. It comes in with the drums and bass, etc. Let's have a listen. And in case you're not sure, here it is in solo. Now I've achieved that sort of sweeping effect there with a wah-wah pedal, but I'm going to switch that off now and try to get something similar with a phaser. So I'll switch the wah-wah off and I've got our phaser turned on. Let's have a listen to that organ sound again with a phaser on it, and I'll start to play around with some of the controls so that you can hear the difference they make as we go along. So a frequency analyzer analyzes frequencies. Yes, you've got it. So its job is just a visual plugin, and it's going to give you a visual representation of what's happening in the audio that it's looking at. Now I've got it applied to the master bus here, so it's looking at the whole piece of music, and these can be really handy when you just really want to pinpoint where certain things are happening in the sound of the music. I'm going to play it and we'll see it working, then I'll explain a couple of things about it. Watch for when the bass comes in here. Okay, so now it's doing its good stuff there. We'll just have a look at a few of the things here. You've got things to control, perhaps whether you want to see the left and the right signal separately or together, just in case different things are going on in that way. Showing the average and the maximums, all those kinds of things. There's lots to play around with there. A couple of things I like about this is you can really zoom in. I can just draw a rectangle around a certain area there, for example, and it will zoom right in on that area to a pretty high degree, and then I can just right click and get right back out. So that's really great if you just want to focus in on a certain group of frequencies. I also like the threshold control here, which you can do it with the slider at the side here or with this knob down here, and what you can do with that is just sort of put a filter on there so that you're isolating perhaps certain peaks in the song, and you can see which frequencies are going above that level. So overall, not much to talk about here, but a really useful plugin to have in your disposable when you're trying to find out what's going on in that mix and what you need to correct. Okay, so next up we have the interesting and peculiar triple EQ here. Now, some of you may wonder what use this is, so bear with me and hang in there and you'll see a use right towards the end of this little section. Now, the triple EQ is just a 3-band EQ. It comes in 3 different flavors. That's the mono, the stereo, and the dual. Now, the stereo and the dual are different in the sense that with the stereo plugin, you affect both the left and the right channels equally, and with the dual, you can affect them separately. Now I've got it in the dual mode at the moment, but I've got them linked, so it's very similar to the stereo mode. But let's just have a quick look at the controls before I unlink them. So you have your main node here, which you can drift around like so to different frequencies, and you have a sort of a Q control here as well, so that you can change the Q. And then on each end you'll see these sliders like this. This is kind of like a high shelf here, and this is a bit like a low shelf down the bottom. So that gives you sort of 3 bands of variation, so to speak. I'll just right click on those so that we can actually set them all back to their default. Now, one of the things I say you can do in the dual channel one is to link the channel. So I've got them linked absolutely here, so they'll do exactly the same thing. I'll unlink them for the moment and I'll just change one of those channels. So here we go, we're making a change to the channel there, and I'll link them again. And I'll change it to relative down here before I do. So I'll link them again, and you can see that as I move one around, the other one changes in a relative way. So that's interesting so far. I'm not sure which use I'd have for that, but some of you may have some suggestions in the comment. Where I would use it is if I actually mirror them. Now I'll demonstrate to you why I would do that. Let's unlink them again. I'll set them both back to their default. I'll set the linking to mirrored over here, and I'll switch them back to linked, and you can see that as I drag one around, the other one does the absolute opposite. Now what I've done here is I've applied this to the rhythm guitar part in this song. Now the rhythm guitar part is actually made up of 2 guitars, one hard pan to the left, one hard pan to the right. So let's have a just quick listen to that so we can put it in context. So here it is in the song. And here are those guitars. So if you're listening in stereo there, you'll fairly clearly hear 2 guitars, one hard pan left, the other one hard pan right. A very common thing to do to give a really spread sound to guitars. Now, another important thing when you do spread guitars out very opposite like that, is to actually change the sound of each one. This is a really handy way of doing it, because what I can do to one of the guitars, I could say add a whole bunch of high frequencies there, and it will do the absolute opposite to the other one. It will take those same frequencies out. So have a listen to the sound as I move it around. So that's a really handy way of getting a really nice spread. And it also is interesting because when you do that, they work really well when you listen to the track in mono. Let's switch over to mono and have a listen to it. Always a good idea to check in mono like that. So that's triple EQ. That's how I would use it. Let me know in the comments if you've got a different use for it at all, but a really cool plugin. So continuing with the same guitar part, we're going to look at the amp sim that you get in this plugin bundle. Now, I'm going to switch off all the effects I had on those rhythm guitars, so we'll just be getting the dry sound. Then I'm going to let you have a listen to the clean sound of each of the 3 amps that you get with this plugin. So here it is without any amp sim at all. Now let's have a listen to the first amp. That's the classic clean. This is the classic drive. And then modern drive. You can hear a bit of drive in there already. So what I like about this is that as you switch between the 3 amps, the actual settings, the gain, the drive, bass, mid, treble, etc., actually stay the same as you go between them. So you're just hearing the different character or the color of that particular amp. So I actually find that really handy, because often on these things, all the settings are changing as you go between them. Now, the other sound that I like you to listen to is a more overdriven sound. So I'll switch to a preset that I've set there, and this is the overdriven sound. We'll start off on the classic amp there and have a listen to that. This one. We'll turn the drive up a bit. Let's have a listen to that in the song. So with these kind of guitar effects, I reckon it's really important to listen to in the context of the song, because that's where it really counts. If you solo these things all the time and listen to them, it doesn't necessarily represent how it's going to sound in the actual mix. So let's move on to our last plugin, and I promise you it's more exciting than you think, and that's the gain plugin. So here we are looking at the gain control. In fact, not one gain control, but 2 gain controls at the same time. I'll tell you why in a moment, but let's start off with the basic functionality. You may already have one of these in your DAW or something similar. It may be called trim or something like that, but it's always handy to have a gain control, particularly during gain staging. And take a look at my gain staging video if you haven't done already, because it's really worthwhile knowing. But I, in this case, have 2 gain controls, one applied to the kick drum and one applied to the bass guitar, and let's have a listen. We'll see what they do. This one turns the kick drum up. Hope you're following me so far. This one turns the bass guitar up and down. Okay, no rocket science there. You're probably wondering what the hell I'm doing here. Well, where this becomes really powerful, this particular tool, is with the grouping function. So if I open up the group controls here and I add, for example, this kick drum to A, and then I'll do the same. I'll add the bass guitar to A. Then of course that means that they're now linked, so that as I change one, the other one goes up and down respectively. You can also do some fairly interesting things like reversing them. So if we do this reverse and I'll play the track, I'll turn the bass guitar up and you can hear the kick is going down, and vice versa. Okay, you could also adjust them relatively. So if we actually make them different here, we'll turn the reversing off. And you can see there are different values here, but as I turn one down, the other one changes in a relative way. So that's basically it for the gain plugin. It's got some really handy grouping controls, which I think you could make really good use of when fine-tuning in a mix. Now, also, don't forget that a gain control is not just useful at the beginning of the chain, but useful to have in the middle of your effects chain, because not all of the effects have an output level or some sort of gain adjustment. So it's always handy to have a simple gain control which you can slip in between plugins. So if that doesn't convince you, then nothing will. The link for these plugins is down on the description. Click on that, you can get them right away and start using them in your projects. Let me know in the comments which one of those is your favorite and how you will be making use of it. If you did like this video, then hit the like button. It really helps me out. If you didn't like this video, hit the dislike button 2 times. If you like this kind of content, then please do subscribe and ring the bell on YouTube so that you get to see notifications about my future videos. And you might like to try one of these two right here. Now, if you did make it this far in the video, then let me know in the comments. Say, hey Mike, I made it to the end and you're my hero. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next one.